Therefore, each of the different aspects of practice which each bhikkhu who takes up the training uses to discipline himself must be considered separately and explained. Even the ways in which bhikkhus train themselves by living in the forest has not yet been completed, but it reached a point where it became necessary to turn to other aspects of the training which are derived from living in the forest, which led on to yet other things. So I hope the reader will forgive me for treating some of the topics out of order, but I had to do it this way for the reasons given above. More about training and discipline. Now we will continue with the various ways of training and discipline as used by these bhikkhus. When they use any particular method of applying discipline to themselves, and they feel that it gives them more strength of heart than other methods, they pay attention to it from then on without slackening or giving up, until they are quite sure that the citta no longer displays any resistance and opinionated obstinacy towards it. Thus, when they go to stay in such places as have been described before, and they feel quite normal in such places, just as they would anywhere else, they have reached the point where they can stop practicing that form of discipline and go on doing their practice in more normal ways. If they have already managed to train and discipline the citta, the result must be of the foregoing kind, such that wherever they live it is satisfactory to them, and they do not upset themselves in various ways, such as by the fear of tigers or ghosts. But also, once they have disciplined themselves, even though the citta does not display any fear like it used to, if they find that they have contentment of heart when staying in any particular place, they will generally prefer to stay in such a place as their normal dwelling place the whole time. This is not different from the way they acted in the time of the Lord Buddha, for the Sāvakas preferred to live in whatever manner suited their natural inclinations. Thus, some preferred to live in the forests and hills, so they stayed in such places for the remainder of their lives. For example, Venerable Anya Gondanya, who only came out of the forests and hills when he was near to the time of his death, Nibbana, and went to see the Lord Buddha to pay his last respects before finally entering Nibbana. None of the younger bhikkhus or samaneras in the place where the Lord was staying had ever seen him before, wearing his robes dyed with red earth, there being no dark brown or yellow dye from the jackfruit tree available in the deep forests and jungles. So they were uncertain about him, thinking that he was an old wandering monk. And where did he get those robes from? So they went to see the Lord Buddha, and in accordance with their thoughts, they said, "Lord, please forgive us for troubling you, but we wish to know where this old wandering monk has come from with robes of such a frightful color. They are red as if they had been dyed in blood, or what else we don't know." The Lord saw the wrong attitude of these young bhikkhus and samaneras, who had such doubts that they did not respect this Mahathaira, so he spoke to them immediately, saying, "This is Venerable Anya Gondanya, the elder brother of all of you, and the first of the Sāvakas of the Tathagata to reach Dhamma. You must remember your elder brother and keep this in mind from now on, for Venerable Anya Gondanya has been an arahant since the beginning of the sasana of the Tathagata. He has always behaved and practiced in the right manner, samītikamma, habitually living in the forests and hills, and having no liking for the involvement and turbulence of crowds of people. But now his body is old, and beyond the point where it can be cured with medicines, so he left the forest to come and see the Tathagata, and to pay his last respects, for before long he will enter Nibbana. It is rare to find any of the sons of the Tathagata who have an inherent liking for living in the forests and hills, such as Venerable Anya Gondanya has. So all of you should remember well that the bhikkhu who has just left the Tathagata is Venerable Anya Gondanya, the first and eldest of the sons of the Tathagata, and the most senior of all of you, and not the old wandering monk as all of you thought." As soon as the Lord Buddha had explained the facts about Venerable Anya Gondanya to them, the young bhikkhus and samaneras felt sorry, and saw their fault in speaking improperly about him to the great teacher, without having properly considered the matter beforehand. There also arose great faith and respect in them for Venerable Anya Gondanya, as well as feelings of regret that he had gone away before they had learnt about him from their great teacher. In so far as the bhikkhu's liking for living in the forest and hills is concerned, The above story is very like that of those who practiced following the way of Venerable Ajaan Mun. The main difference is that Venerable Anya Gondanya was an arahant who is known to all Buddhists. But as for those who are followers of Venerable Ajaan Mun, right up to the present day, whatever kinds of bhikkhus they may be, whether in fact they are like Venerable Anya Gondanya or only Patujjanas, I cannot say, so I have just said what I can about it. Those bhikkhus who are determined to train and discipline themselves by living in the forest and hills, and by using the method of reducing their food, take less than normal all the time. In saying that they reduce their food, this means that they eat little, that they do not eat what the body wants, nor under the dictation of craving, tanha, which may infiltrate into them at times. Thus they may try eating 70% or 60%, maybe going down to 40% of normal, until they find what suits them, or in some circumstances they may increase and then reduce their food intake, but they try all the time to maintain a reduced diet. Or maybe they look upon it as a practice which goes together as a partner with all the other methods of practice which they do for long periods of time, for 1 or 2 or many months, as it suits their practice of citta bhavana and the physical body, without going too far so that they become sick and too weak with hunger. Therefore they try to aid and promote their striving until the body shows untoward reactions, or until the citta improves to such an extent that they no longer need the aid of this method of training and discipline, in which case they can go on smoothly and steadily, and they may even be able to give up taking so little food. But this depends on each individual case, and it is not the invariable rule. As far as we know, all those bhikkhus who have ever gained strength of heart from any particular method will hold to that method, and they are never likely to let it go into degradation. For however high their strength of heart may become, they will generally have developed special skills and techniques on the path along which they have been going all the time, and it is as if they see the value of it and always think of that method with heartfelt appreciation. If one thinks of that method as though it were a person, one would say that one appreciates the value and virtue of that one who has been of such great value to oneself. Or again, if one thinks of it in terms of Dhamma, one would recollect the value of that Dhamma which has been of such value to oneself, like the Lord Buddha who bowed in homage to the Dhamma, for example. When reducing food intake, the eating of only a little makes all parts of the body become light. Its strength decreases, so that it does not bother the citta, which makes the practice of bhavana more easy and the attainment of calm to be quicker than it normally would be when one does not reduce food. This applies only to those whose nature suits this practice. In doing the practice of bhavana while taking little food, the heart does not usually have its ups and downs in connection with calm. This differs from its normal state in the early stages of practice, when one does not reduce food, and the citta is at such a level of development that it still needs training. When one takes little food, walking jangama is easy. Sitting in samadhi one feels contented, and both during the day and at night, one's bhavana will generally give similar results. Whereas normally, when walking jangama and sitting in samadhi, night is the time when the bodily constitution is more subtle, and it always tends to go better than during the day. But for the person who likes eating little, both times give similar results. If one fasts for many days, feelings of hunger and weakness arise often, but the citta tends to be much more subtle than when one only reduces one's food intake, and both in samadhi and panya, one has much more skill and dexterity. In fasting, the bhikkhus generally start by fasting for a short time, and then gradually increase the time until they are fasting for long periods. In other words, to begin with they fast between 2 and 5 days to try it out, but as soon as they see that they get good results in their bhavana, they increase the time steadily to 8 or 9 days at a time, depending on circumstances. In the period when they are fasting, they continue with the work of bhavana, and they also keep a watch on the citta and the body. If they see that they are altogether in a good state, they continue alternately fasting at times and eating food at times. As they steadily increase their fasting, they may go on for many days at a time, some reaching 15 or 18 days, and there are some who continue fasting for a month when the situation is favorable. While fasting like this, if the body feels very weak, they may take a little milk on some days. For those who find that fasting suits their nature, while fasting there is great value to be gained of many different kinds, as follows. After the first 2 nights of fasting, one no longer gets tired or sleepy, and after several nights have passed, this becomes stronger, so that sleepiness is no longer a disturbance. Wherever one sits, the body remains erect like a post, without nodding or fidgeting at all. Mindfulness, sati, is good and doesn't slip away. There is little absent-mindedness, and the longer one goes on, the better mindfulness becomes, so that one almost never forgets oneself. When thoughts about anything arise in the citta, one's mindfulness immediately catches up with them almost every time, without even having to set up the resolve not to let one's mindfulness slip away forgetfully, for it remains there on its own quite naturally. This may be because the fasting which one does is for the purpose of striving for one's development, and because one has set up one's mindfulness and continually maintained it from the first day one went on fast. Therefore, one's mindfulness does not tend to slip and be forgotten at the beginning of the fast, nor for the remainder of it, however many days it may go on. The work of pāvana then tends to go on smoothly and skillfully all the time and in every way, both in samadhi and paññā. When one wants to rest the citta down in samadhi, one can do so as one wants to. When one wants to investigate by way of paññā, after the citta has arisen out of samadhi, paññā will be of the kind that becomes steadily more skillful as one goes on, and it will not be sluggish and inert as it usually is when one does the practice of investigation. In all the various attitudes and postures of the body, mindfulness will be present, and one is not easily distracted or led away by anything. When one investigates anything that happens to arise, the heart catches up with it very quickly and can understand it clearly and much faster than usual. Then the body has hardly any of the normal aches and pains, and it feels unusually light. The citta will also be able to see dangers with ease, and it does not tend to oppose the truth and be very stubborn as it used to. Those who are at the level of samadhi will then be calm in all bodily situations and postures, and those who are at the level of paññā will always be possessed of contemplation and thought, analyzing causes and results in those things of endless kinds which they encounter. The citta is then engrossed in doing the investigation by looking into every one of the Dhamma. Dhamma, plural, means objects of mind, either sensory, as in memories of past sense perception, or non-sensory, as in thoughts about principles of Dhamma, logic, and worldly principles. Meanwhile, all trace of tiredness and fatigue has disappeared, as if they were eating food as normal. If any feelings of tiredness, hunger, or weakness arise, it will only come when the citta withdraws from samadhi, or when the citta takes a rest from doing the investigation, or again when one comes out of samadhi to change the attitude or posture of the body. Then one is likely to feel it. The reason for there being no feelings of hunger or weakness when the citta enters samadhi and when investigating all the Dhamma is because the citta is completely engrossed in samadhi and paññā, and it has no interest in paying attention to the physical body. Therefore, in effect, there is no bodily feeling at that time. When the day comes that one decides to eat food, a dispute arises between the citta and the body-mind group, the khandhas, and they cannot agree together. The body-mind group say that they are weak and want food and supporting nutritional aids to sustain life. On the other hand, the citta says that while fasting, the practice of pāvana is good, and the heart is calm, clear, and not disturbed by all sorts of things. But as soon as one has eaten, pāvana deteriorates. For once one is full of food, one thinks only of one's pillow and sleeping, instead of Dhamma and its subtle meanings, as happens when one is fasting. Therefore it does not want to eat, because after eating, pāvana does not go properly, whereas the body will be strong, which is good. Thus, between the citta and the body-mind group, there is a dispute of this kind. The owner, here referring to that part of oneself which takes responsibility, a term used by those who practice kammatthana, must decide which way to go. To fast at times and to eat well at times is a good way, for the citta gains benefits while the body knows how to put up with deprivation, without taking more and more nourishment until it becomes excessive, which is the way of animals only eating and sleeping all the time. One cannot stand too much fasting, for the body is bound to start breaking up. On the other hand, to fill up with food makes one lazy, so that one goes looking for one's pillow rather than for Dhamma and its meaning, as happens when one fasts. Thus it is that fasting has many benefits as described above. The time when one is fasting is the time for increasing one's effort to its maximum capacity in all positions and postures of the body. One sleeps little. One sleeps just for a short time, which is enough for the needs of the body, but it gets rid of all nodding and drowsiness. For those whose nature is suited to this method, it will enable them to see both samadhi and banya for themselves, right there in the present. The feelings of hunger that arise strongly at times will only persist for the first 2 or 3 days. After that it diminishes for many days, but the feeling of weakness tends to increase. The citta then becomes steadily more subtle and skillful from the first day of the fast onwards. It is this which, when the time comes to eat food again, causes the citta to be sorry and to want to go on fasting. But the physical body feels that it cannot stand it any longer, so one must give way to it to some extent, otherwise it will cease to function properly, and the body-mind group will fall apart before the kilesas are cured and got rid of. So one must apply the remedy, for if one were to follow the desires of one's heart, the body would almost certainly not survive. But if one were to give way entirely and let the body have just what it wants, the heart would not be likely to drink Dhamma as it should be able to, and as one intends that it should. Fasting gives results which are quite evident both in samadhi and banya, which leads one to reflect upon the Lord Buddha when he practiced his most rigorous austerities and took no food, with the intention of gaining enlightenment just by fasting, without any striving by way of the heart. While he was doing this, no results were to be seen, but when he took the sweet rice milk which Lady Sujata brought and gave him, even though he had taken some food that evening, every part of his body still remained bright, light, and vibrant. Then that same night, as soon as the Lord developed mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, which is work done by way of the heart, it enabled the Lord to gain enlightenment that night. It seems likely that the effect on the Lord's body which came from the fasting he had done was a help to his heart, in that it prevented the body from being too much of a burden on the heart at that time. Even though the Lord censured fasting, saying that it was not the way that he attained enlightenment, it is probable that he did not intend this to include fasting for the purpose of aiding the work of development in the sphere of the heart. It is likely that he meant only fasting as the sole means of attaining enlightenment, which is the wrong way, because the attainment of enlightenment or reaching Dhamma refers to the heart as being the important one, and not the body at all, due to the fact that the kilesas dwell only in the heart and not in the body. However, to the extent that the body is a supporting condition for the kilesas, it can cause them to increase and become strong. This can be the case when, for example, the constitution of the body is at full strength and it displays this fact, and it is immediately obvious to the well-trained heart, which knows that the khandhas are getting out of hand. But if there are also kilesas in the heart, they are bound to be drawn in so that they flare up. Then one way and another one will not be able to keep up with them, and they will lead one down until one is completely submerged in the mud. When the time comes that one's wits return, one realizes what has happened, if one looks. But if one does not look, one will never have any means of knowing what happens, so one gives way and allows the kilesas and the body-mind group, the dhatu khandha, to lead one into whatever they will. This is how the kilesas and the body become associated together. But on their own, the body-mind group are no danger to the citta when the citta is pure. From the above, one may see that fasting is very helpful for the practice of citta bhavana in some characters. Therefore the Lord did not completely forbid fasting when it was used in connection with bhavana. This may be seen in some of the Vinaya rules concerning fasting. Thus, a bhikkhu who fasts for the purpose of showing off to the world commits an offense every time he goes on fast, and also every time he acts in any way for the purpose of showing off his fasting. But if he fasts for the purpose of striving by way of the heart, he may do so. This the Tathagata allows. This may have been because the Lord saw the value of fasting as an aid to striving by way of the heart in those cases which are characteristically suited to this method. Therefore the Lord gave permission to use it and did not forbid it entirely. In those whose characteristics are not suited to fasting, if they were to do so, it is probable that they would gain no value from it. This is similar to the practice of those forms of Gammatana which do not suit a person's nature. The saying that one man's meat is another man's poison is quite applicable here. From what I have actually seen, even nowadays there seem to be many people whose nature is well suited to fasting, and this is the reason that I have included this discussion here for the reader to think about. In particular, at Wat Ba Bantad, which is my own monastery, there are many bhikkhus who like to go on fast often. In fact, it is almost as though the whole monastery takes turns to go on fast. This happens all the time and has continued since the monastery was founded, and it goes on throughout the dry season, the wet season, and both in the Vassa period and out of it. Nowadays, there are still those who fast in the monastery in the same way, including the English and other Western-born bhikkhus who like fasting, for they say that when they fast their pāvana goes better than when they do not, so they do it frequently. This they also do from their own volition, for there is no compulsion or coercion to fast at all. The Western bhikkhus are able to fast quite as well as the Thai bhikkhus, and they can do so for many days at a time. Then they eat for 1 or 2 days before continuing to fast. Some fast for up to 14 or 15 days, and they stand up to it well, whereas others go on for 9 or 10 days. They are quite able to fast like this in the same way as our Thai bhikkhus do. When asked, they say that while fasting, the chitta has much less tendency to be restless and uncontrollable. It can then be governed more easily, and it is both calm and peaceful and also more stable, and it is not easily distracted or disturbed. Therefore it makes them want to fast often, so that the chitta may advance as fast as it ought to. This makes us feel sympathy with them, and glad that they have made the effort to come so far across the ocean to become ordained in the Buddhasasana, to take up the moral precepts and pāvana with hardships and deficiencies. They have to take food which is unfamiliar, and to be separated from their home, parents, and relatives for many years, and they do not complain of being homesick or longing for their country, friends, and relatives with whom they had lived in close contact at all. It would seem that these Western bhikkhus became ordained with the true purpose of searching for Dhamma and development, which accords with their having been born into a race which is intrinsically clever, although they never show any signs of being haughty or conceited. In fact, in all ways, they have a humility and modesty which is worthy of respect, and in their relations with other bhikkhus and samaneras in the monastery, they behave well and act properly. Nearly all the Western bhikkhus who are in this monastery like to fast, without any persuasion being used. They just see the other bhikkhus going on fast and ask about it, and when they understand the reasons, they try it for themselves, and after that they are regularly seen to be on fast. When they are asked about it, they say that their pāvana is better than usual, so from then on they go on fast regularly. In particular, in the Vassa period, which is a time that is free from other things, and a time when the bhikkhus increase their efforts to practice the way in this monastery, there are some days when very few bhikkhus go out for Paṭipadā and eat food together, for when they do not eat, there is no need to go for Paṭipadā. Each bhikkhu fasts for whatever length of time suits him. Some go on for 4 or 5 days, some go on for longer times up to 12 days or a fortnight or more, until the end of the Vassa period. This includes both Thai and foreign bhikkhus who fast in the same way and for many days equally. At this monastery, during the Vassa period, every 7 days there is a Dhamma meeting to aid and promote the effort which is put into developing the way of the heart, so that it shall progress in accordance with the favorableness of the prevailing conditions. After the Vassa period has ended, work and duties become very troublesome in connection with people coming and going for Dhamma, for Sīla and Dana, and various good actions, kusala deeds, which are in the nature of Thai people who are Buddhists. They have been used to doing these things for generations, for they have always been considered as the heart of those who are Buddhists right from the beginning. Therefore it is most praiseworthy, for such acts as this are not only good actions giving beneficial results to those who do them, but they are also setting a good precedent for the young people of the next generation to follow. The self-training methods of the Thutanga Kammatthana bhikkhus who follow after Venerable Ajaan Mun are many and varied, for they differ in each individual case. In writing about them, it is therefore necessary to divide them up into various categories, in accordance with those cases in which the methods of training differed from each other. This is so that you who read this with practical interest can take up and gain value from any of the methods of the acharyas which you consider to be suitable to your character and your situation in life. Some of the acharyas who set out to practice kammatthana with practical interest never experienced the citta dropping into a state of calm and unity for years. But as soon as they learnt about some skillful methods of training and discipline in various ways which were recommended by the acharyas and their friends and contemporaries in Dhamma, and took them up and tried them out selectively to their liking, the citta steadily became calm and peaceful, and they were able to establish firm and strong roots of the citta. This was because the method of training was right for their characters. As for example, those who managed to make the citta go down into a concentrated state when fear arose at the sound of tigers roaring in the vicinity of the place where they were staying, which would not otherwise have been possible. Therefore, the character of the person and the means of Dhamma which are used for training are both important and necessary for all who practice the way in each and every case. Thus, for example, in those whose citta is strong, active, and venturesome, who do not easily submit to the acharya or anyone else, it is necessary for them to be their own acharya and to train and discipline themselves, using their own methods which are inherently and especially rough and strong. Some bhikkhus like to go and live where they are hard-pressed and up against it, having to put up with a lack of the four requisites, sometimes doing without, sometimes having enough, but generally lacking amenities and hard up, and also living in very frightening places to force and drive themselves on, because people of every class and age have characteristic tendencies which react well to being forced ever since the day they were born, for there is no way in which we can develop ourselves and prosper by letting go and relaxing. It requires both ourselves and others to help drive us on towards all types of virtue and benefit. This we can see from the way in which our parents got angry at times, scolding and treating us harshly, and also the way that the acharyas practice towards us, and how they normally use words of rebuke and admonishment in close connection with all the Dhamma which they teach and train those who live constantly under their care and guidance. To use only pleasant and soft words in the teaching is not likely to be suitable to all conditions and occasions, because some cases respond well to a hot and spicy flavor. So the teaching must have both the harsh and mild methods blended together. Speaking of rebuke and admonishment makes me think with gratitude of the excellence of Venerable Ajaan Mun for the way in which he used to scold me and the other bhikkhus at times when we had done something wrong. When he was doing this, his attitude was most awe-inspiring while castigating and shaping up his followers who had been stupid so as to make them true people by using rebuke and admonishment. Looking at those who were being rebuked and admonished made one feel very sorry for them, because they were so frightened that they shivered, like baby birds in the rain. But the result of this was that it remained fixed in the heart for a long time. This is the kind of result that comes from others to help one in one's training. As for the results which come from training oneself, those venerable ones who have trained themselves to the utmost of their strength and ability will know clearly for themselves what they are. As for instance, those who have gained a complete calm of heart from walking jankama after being afraid due to the sounds of tigers roaring, and then the citta turning round and becoming bold and fearless while still walking, in such a manner as one would not have believed to be possible. Because of this, training oneself is a very important way of working, which those who wish to progress in their own development cannot afford to overlook, both in the direction of the world and in the direction of Dhamma.